Good afternoon, my name is Rob Winch. I am going to be presenting today as well, and I am the project lead for Spring Security and other security-related projects at Spring, and I also work on a number of the other projects, but mostly focused on security. Today we're going to be talking about Vault. So who here has heard of Vault, first of all? Who here knows a lot about it? Okay. Frank, come on up here. He'll do it too. I wouldn't mind sitting down. So we're going to be talking about Vault. In a very brief summary, Vault is a way to store secrets securely. So that fits in nice with our talk. Our outline for today is we're going to talk a little bit about our motivation. What is motivating us to use something like Vault? And then we're going to talk about Vault itself. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with how to use Spring Vault to make things a little easier on you in a Spring application. So who here has heard of Brian Krebs? Anyone? He's a cybersecurity reporter. So he reports a lot on exploits and stuff. And he says if you connect it to the internet, someone will try to hack it. So this is part of our motivation. But I would take this further. I would say if you have code that is running, someone's going to try to hack it. It doesn't even have to be on the internet. People are going to try to hack it. And so a lot of people will try to tell me, well, I don't really have something that anyone's going to really try to hack. I mean, it's just this little app and stuff. And I say, okay, well, do you have a database? Like, yeah, do you use a username and password? Yeah, I use a username and password. I say, well, get rid of those because, who cares? No one cares about your app. No username and password. Do you have a firewall? Yeah, I have a firewall. Oh, why don't you get rid of that too? Because no one's going to try to hack you. And I say, well, I'm a little uncomfortable with these suggestions. I'm like, why? Well, someone might hack me. So a lot of people try to demean their app and try to rationalize, I don't need to do security. But there's lots of reasons that this might happen, that someone might hack you. There's white hat hackers. They're doing it for good so that they can get some money. Black hat hackers, they're going to try to get some money by exploiting you and selling the information that they get. They might be just trying to compromise your resources. So your computer itself is actually valuable because they might want to do another exploit from your computer and not get caught. So they can sell all these things and make money off of them. And there's people that are just bored. Imagine this, there's someone bored on the internet. Anyone think the odds of that are somewhat high? If there is someone bored on the internet, there is someone that wants to hack your application. So there's lots and lots of reasons that someone might want to exploit your application. And the other thing is we need to understand what is our motivation to protect it, because you do need to balance the amount of effort you put into protecting your application versus the amount of effort that someone's going to try to hack it, because there are different levels of security that you're going to need to do there. You're never going to protect it fully. You just want to do it enough that no one's going to try to do it and passes and does the next guy. So there, for example, you might have financial incentives. Maybe you're a banking institution. You have bank accounts or credit cards. You want to protect those. Maybe you're a big internet company that's being sold for billions of dollars to another company and all your passwords got compromised. Anyone know what company I'm talking about? Might impact their purchase, Yahoo. So they lost, and the problem with this is everyone gets hacked. It's a matter of how you react that makes it important, right? So Yahoo basically got hacked. I can't even remember the number of users, but it was something ridiculous. Their passwords got stolen, and the passwords were basically stolen a long time ago, and they didn't disclose it, and they knew about it. And so now they're in this acquisition phase, being multi-billion-dollar purchase, and now they don't know, is this going to impact how much they're worth? Because their users, a lot of users are like, you kind of lost my confidence. And that goes on to another thing that you could lose, maybe not just financial incentives, but the user's trust, right? Your credibility, your reputation. Without reputation, you have nothing. You don't have users that want to use you because they're going to use someone else. So your reputation is probably the most important thing that you need to defend against. And you say, okay, this is a lot of the dry, boring stuff, but we're moving along here. But I'd like to talk a little bit about secrets, because secrets are somewhat important to talk about, because depending on the secret, it depends on how you keep it safe. So who here knows of a secret? What's an example of a secret that I might be talking about? Anyone? Password, that's a good one. Anyone else? Encryption key. Cryptographic keys, maybe more generally speaking. Anyone else? This is not a trick question. These are all right answers. Certificates, great. Great. Social security number, maybe? Yep. Okay, credit cards, we talked about that too. All examples of how we might store stuff. So the question is, how do we keep them a secret? And I'd like to break it into two categories, and it's actually password is divided. So when you're saving a password that you're trying to validate a user, so you say, I have a username and a password, and you submit it to me. How do you store that? Do you encrypt it? See one head shaking. I see one head shaking no, one head shaking yes. You hash it, thank you. So why don't you encrypt it? Encrypting means you can decrypt it, right? And if you decrypt it, that means someone can steal it, and that's bad. So who here can tell me how you're supposed to hash it? Do you use MD5? Absolutely. SHA-1. How about SHA-512? Anyone? With salt? No? Okay. Very good. Algorithm that's going to be slow. So the ones that I was listing before are cryptographic hashes. Cryptographic hashes are intentionally fast. And the problem with it is we take this little journey through time, I like to call it. At the beginning of time, people said plain text was okay. Then they realized everyone kept their passwords, the same password for every application. So when Joe's social site got hacked, then your bank password was exposed. So they said, oh, we're going to protect it, so we'll run it through this one-way hash and use MD5. MD5 was found to have lots of collisions, among other things. And so they decided MD5 was a bad idea. And then they moved on to SHA, which was a little bit slower and fine for the times, until they realized, well, the problem is I can actually run it through the hash and save it in a lookup table called a rainbow table. And so what people did is they did all the work up front, and then they said, give me a hash, any hash, and I'll tell you the answer. And so they looked it up, and then they said, all right, well, why don't I use salt? Salt is where you run a random set of bytes along with the password through the same algorithm, and then you store the salt alongside in plain text, which is fine that it's plain text, that's intentional. But the idea is that you can't attack just a single password. You have to do every password and every salt combination. So the amount of storage and computation for this is next to impossible. But then came along modern computers. And now I can run on the order of billions of hashes a second on a single GPU using SHA. Now, do you think that's going to secure your password? No. So instead, we're going to use a password-based hash. It's called a one-way adaptive function, and you would use PBKDF2 is the NIST-approved one. I would use bcrypt if I had my choice, and then there's scrypt. And we won't go into the details of those, but just know that when we're talking about secrets, we are not talking about a secret where I'm validating your username and password. We are talking today about secrets where I have a secret and I need to provide it to someone else. Now, you might say, okay, well, I've seen some systems, and I actually want to get a show of hands because it kind of disturbs me, the number of systems that I've seen this way. I've seen some systems that basically say, okay, what we're going to do is we'll let you log in, and then you can go to this console and extract out an encrypted password. Okay, so you extract out this encrypted password, and then you provide that encrypted password to their API. And the idea is, what they're trying to say is, I have this encrypted password, so it's safe to put inside your scripts and stuff, and no one's going to steal it. Any laughter? I mean, please? Crickets, I'm like, this is where everyone laughs. I have that in my notes, and no one did it. Maybe you need to see my notes. But No, so the problem with this is hopefully pretty obvious. As soon as the encrypted password is a valid password, it doesn't matter that it's encrypted. The only thing it's providing is if you reuse the password for other services, they can't use it. But what else is the problem with this encrypted password? We talked about this earlier. It can be decrypted. So they're not storing your password properly. Oh, doesn't it make you angry? So don't do that. Don't use encrypted passwords. What they should be doing is they should just use an opaque token randomly generated. And then what are you gaining by that in addition to all the things that we've already mentioned? Well, what if they change their password? Now they have to change all the spots in their scripts where it's where they're using this encrypted password. Or what if that encrypted password gets compromised? Then they have to change everything also. Whereas if you're just using a randomly generated token, then it doesn't matter. You just change that one token and move on your way, or your password and move on your way. So hopefully that's clear. You don't want to use the encrypted password directly. Excuse me. All right, so we do want to encrypt the password when we need to provide it to someone else. And we want to do that in an intelligent fashion. So I need a show of hands here. Who here has done their own encryption? And when I say your own encryption, I mean, it doesn't mean you wrote your own algorithm. It means you've used some libraries, potentially. Or actually, let's start off with someone wrote their own algorithm.
Well, in school.
Frank probably did it right, though, so that's probably okay. All right, and who here has done their own encryption with existing libraries? Who here believes they did it right? That might be why you're here. That's good. Who here is a cryptographer?
Wait, right at the time?
At the time.
A week later?
Who here is a cryptographer? All right, I always have to ask that because I've said no one knows how to do cryptography in this room, including myself. And one time someone said, well, I'm a cryptographer. Yeah, I actually do. So I always have to double check that. So now I'm safe to say it. No one here knows how to do cryptography right because you're not cryptographers, including myself. So I've seen people say, okay, well, you don't know how to do cryptography. I don't know how to do cryptography, so let's just skip it. Plain text in production. Woohoo! You don't have to raise your hands, but I know there's some of you out there that have used plain text for your passwords in production. That is not the right answer either. So what is the right answer? How are you supposed to encrypt your passwords? Does anyone know the proper way? So let's start with a little bit of a primer on cryptography. What is encryption versus signing? Anyone? Please.
So encryption is you're changing it into a gobbledygook that you can then change it back at some point. Hopefully with the idea of keeping it secret. Signing is a way of being able to say that the person who has signed something that you can later validate that was the person who, or that the person who had access to those certificates that did that signing is the person that you think did this.
So I'm going to try to summarize his answer a little bit. The answer is, and I would count this as correct, the answer is that when you're doing encryption, it's going to keep a secret. The goal is to keep a secret. Whereas when you're signing, the goal is to not let anyone change the value of the person who signed it. And you can actually kind of remember this, when someone signs a piece of paper, it's supposed to be they're agreeing with the document. Obviously, someone can change the document afterwards, but with cryptography, that's not possible. So a lot of people are confused by this, though. They say, well, it's encrypted. I can't tell what the data is. That means it can't be modified. That's incorrect. Encryption does not guarantee that it cannot be modified. In fact, I can modify a document, even though I don't know the values of it, and still make it a valid document when it's encrypted. Because I'm magic. No. It's because encryption's not supposed to do that. It's not the goal of it. Encryption is not trying to keep something from being modified. So is it important to sign and to encrypt? And the answer is yes. But what is the order that you do it? Do you sign and then encrypt and then sign? Encrypt and sign. There's actually an ongoing debate, but the correct answer is encrypt and sign. I say that with total authority. But the actual real answer is authenticated encryption, which does it in a single pass. So that actually used to be the answer in modern times, as Bobby Hubbard was pointing out 10 minutes later. It is now modern times. Authenticated encryption is the answer in modern days. So what's that? So the question is, what algorithms do that? And I'm glad you asked that. AES GCM is probably the most standard recommended encryption in mode. But there's all sorts of other things that you're going to have to worry about when you're doing this. So first of all, you have to figure out, when do you need to rotate your keys? How long is a key good for? Does anyone know that? Well, it varies by algorithm, but you better keep track of all the data you're signing. And then there's also, how do you rotate it and still have your previous key? And why do you need to rotate it? Well, it's not just someone might guess it. It's actually your encryption scheme and signing scheme is fundamentally broken after you've signed so much data, because someone can actually compute the key based upon that. And then there's, if it gets stolen, how do you revoke the key? And then there's, how do you recover all the passwords and revoke all the passwords? And then how do you determine what happened with auditing? So this is our DIY crypto solution. Who here is excited to go home and DIY now? Frank. Frank is the one that's going to do it right. So Frank actually wrote Vault, so we're all in good shape here. So hopefully this is giving you a lot of motivation to say, I don't want to do this myself. I know I need to do it, and plain text is the answer. No, plain text is not the answer. No, I don't want to do it myself. I don't even want to try to use the libraries myself, because the other thing that I got news for you is, this is the other paradigm that causes cryptography problems, right? We said, who here is a cryptographer? Those are the people that understand cryptography. And then the cryptographers, you ask, who here is a programmer? And none of them raise their hands. Cryptographers are writing all these crypto APIs, and the programmers are trying to use them. And if you were a programmer, you'd say, why did you let me have this option if it's fundamentally broken? They're like, well, it's an option in the algorithm. But it's broken. They don't think of these things. They don't make it foolproof for the developer. And so the problem is you don't have someone that knows cryptography inside and out and knows how to program inside and out. And if you do, it's very, very rare and not typical. So even when you get these crypto APIs, they're probably hard to use correctly. So that brings us to the heart of our talk. Vault. What is Vault? Again, the main premise is Vault is a secure way to store secrets. And that is kind of the crux of it, but it does other things as well. And one of the coolest things, I think, is it does dynamic secrets. So what do I mean by dynamic secrets? I'm glad you asked. So Vault has different backends, and one of the backends it could do is something like MySQL. So let's consider a scenario. You have a prod issue, and you need a username and password. And you say, admin, give me a username and password for this prod issue. And they say, OK, I'll give you a username and password. Here it is. And a week later, you solve the problem, and you tell the admin, hey, I'm done. Go ahead and revoke those credentials. And the admin's really busy that day, and it gets lost in an email chain, and he forgets totally about it. A year goes by, and someone finds that username and password somehow, and now all of a sudden they have access to it, and no one's really even thinking about it. This is a problem that happens quite frequently, I'd argue. And obviously the admin might not forget, but it's humans, so humans make errors, right? So how could this be solved with Vault? Well, Vault could say, okay, at the beginning, you have this database, and then the admin sets up Vault to hook into the database. And now what happens is you go to the admin and say, I need a username and password. And the admin says, no problem. They use Vault to create it, and Vault creates what's known as a lease on the username and password. And so it creates the username and password, puts it in the database so it's valid, and then it gives it back to you. And then now you have this username and password that you can leverage for a certain amount of time. And you can set restrictions on it. How many times can it be renewed? What is the window of time? All sorts of things. So it might be valid for like an hour, but you can renew it for up to 2 days or something like that. There's all sorts of limitations you can set on it. And once it expires, Vault will automatically go ahead and revoke it, so you don't run into that problem. Can you take this a step further? Well, what if you wanted to have your application get a new password every time you started it up? It could theoretically integrate with Vault and spin up and get a new username and password. Pretty cool. Another thing, let's say you have another type of secret, like a credit card, and the credit card needs to be persisted to disk somewhere, or a data store. And all of you have realized, well, I'm not a cryptographer, but Rob said that I should do this myself, or I should have someone that knows what they're doing do it. Do we have cryptographers that work here? No, so what am I going to do? You can just submit whatever you need encrypted, like the credit card, tell Vault to encrypt it and don't persist it, send it back, save it in the database, and then when you need it decrypted, you submit it back to Vault, and Vault will decrypt it for you. And then you know that it's being done in a secure fashion because it's done by experts. Now you might be saying, well, how does it do all this stuff? Like, what is the API for this? Well, it has a REST API. So just about any programming language can interact with it securely using HTTPS. All right, so that is the, I'm sorry, is there a question? There's always an assumption. There's always an assumption. And that's an assumption, too, that there is an assumption. All right. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of a demo. And so we've talked about how Vault is going to protect us, and now it's good to see it in action. So the very first thing I like to do is go ahead and start this up. So Vault server is now started. Vault is a binary, and it is the binary is the server and the client. So you see I just started up the server, and we're going to look at the command lines. Hopefully you can see it in the back. There we go. Is that big enough to see in the back? At least, okay, cool. So Vault server -dev root token ID. So what am I doing? Well, the Vault server is saying I'm using the server aspect versus the client. And then -dev means it's in a special mode. And that mode, we're going to get into more details, but it's basically not fit for production, is a very simple summary. And then the dev root token is how you initially authenticate to it, the root token, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, obviously, that's not great for production and why you wouldn't use it, but it's going to work well for our demo. And you'll see down here that dev mode is enabled, and it says that our root token is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it also says somewhere in here that it's unsealed. And, yeah, I wasn't going to really worry about seeing it, but yeah, I guarantee, that's a dangerous statement. It says unseal somewhere. But we'll talk about what sealing and unsealing means in a little bit, but right now we're just using dev, which is not fit for production, and we specified that token. Now the other thing that it did here is it also filled out this, if I can type correctly, this file. So this file is in my home directory called .vault-token, and it has a token in there. So this is making it easy for my Vault client to authenticate. It would not happen if you were not in dev mode. Okay, so now what can we do with our client? So we said earlier that we can persist a secret, right? Let's see how we can persist a secret. The first thing that we need to do is we want to do an export. And the export needs to basically point Vault address, environment variable, to our Vault server. And so you can do that. There's other ways of doing this, but we will use the environment variable because it's the easiest way. And then we're going to go ahead and write a secret. And so here you can see I'm saying vault. I want you to write to secret is like a namespace. And that namespace maps to different backends. And by default, secret is going to go to the generic backend, which is essentially encrypt this and store it for me. And then the ID that we're giving that is hello Spring Vault. You could view it as secret/hello Spring Vault is the whole key, or you could say the secret is the namespace, or you can break it out however you want. But secret is basically saying how you're going to persist that actual key because it's a prefix. And then the username equals Rob and the password equals secret. That's the data that you're going to actually store to it. After that, you can do vault read. And we're going to read it. And you can see I get back Rob secret, and then I get refresh interval. So how long is it going to be valid? And the other thing that's cool is we can do curl, except I don't like curl. Who here likes to use curl? Is it really intuitive? Who here would like a better API for it? Anyone heard of HTTPE? It's really hard to say, but it's spelled HTTPIE. So that's the tool I'm using right here. And it's a lot better version of curl, basically. You can see it formats the output for me, which is kind of nice. It also makes it's a lot more intuitive. So here I'm saying I want it verbose, and then if you don't specify the protocol and the host, it will automatically assume it's localhost and HTTP. So you could spell that all, you can type that all out if you wanted, but I didn't hear. And then the URL is v1 for the version 1, and then that identifier that we saw earlier, secret hello Spring Vault. And then how do you authenticate with it? You add a header called xvault token. And then if you aren't familiar with Linux very well, I'm basically evaluating cat vault token, and that value is being injected into the header. So it's that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see, actually, in the request at the top there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is injected into there. And then I get this response back. And you can also do other cool stuff with this. So for example, oops, that might not be visible, so we'll do that. So here, I'm using JQ. Anyone heard of JQ? Awesome, lots of hands. So JQ is basically a way of parsing JSON from the command line. So I'm just piping it to JQ, and I'm selecting the username from the data response. So now, this is an easy way for you to script things if you're needing to do some scripting with Vault. All right, so that's our Hello World demo. Let me just double check here. Yeah. All right, so we've done Hello World. Now we're going to talk about secret backends. And we talked a little bit about it before. There's the generic backend. And the generic backend, again, is how you're going to persist secrets and basically retrieve or store and read them. But there's a lot of other backends here. And the blue ones are the ones that are dynamic. So those can be automatically integrated. So for example, we went through the MySQL example earlier, but you basically mount it. So mount is a term that they use in Vault. And mount is similar to the Linux mount. You're mounting the secret backend. And once you've done that, it's going to do something with whatever you're writing or reading to it. And you can think about these paths, the path to it, as similar to a Linux mount as well, because whatever you're mounting to, that's where it's going to write it. So if you have like the secret, it's going to write it to the secret mount, or if you have MySQL, it's going to write to the MySQL mount. So it's very similar. That path is relating to that. The other thing to point out is in Vault, there's no relative paths. So if someone has access to a particular path, they cannot use ... to get to it. There's no such thing as a relative path. So that's a really nice thing to know. And then you can also unmount. And if you unmount it, depending on the system that you're integrating with, some of them don't support it, but it will remove all the secrets once you've unmounted it. So say you've mounted, for example, Console. Console is another product produced by HashiCorp. and you unmount it, it would delete all the secrets associated with that backend. So these are the ones that it's using. And now we're going to do a quick demo with MySQL. All right. Any questions? I do want, if you guys do have questions, please feel free to ask as we're going along. I don't want to make you think you have to wait. So anyways, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to mount. So we're going to do vault mount MySQL, and it knows that it's going to mount at MySQL by default because that is the default way to do it. You can say what type it is and where you want to mount, but that means now our prefix of MySQL is going to be used. But you can mount multiple times and have different namespaces and stuff, just like you could with standard Linux mounting, but this is just a nice intuitive default. And then we're going basically now writing to Vault. So it says, I'm writing to the MySQL configuration what our connection information is. And that's a URL. And the URL has Vault and password in it. You can guess that is the username and the password that I have set up for MySQL that Vault is going to use to integrate. So that's how Vault is going to be able to add users. And it's running on localhost 3306. I see all you smart guys out there trying to get onto my computer. Got a firewall on. I don't need any of this. Yeah, BK's already passed it. It's to be expected. I'll re-image when I get home. So we have the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to write our policy. So this is saying that I have a role of read-only. I can name that whatever I want, read-only. But it makes sense for what we're doing. So the SQL is, I'm going to create a user, and then you see the curly braces. That's kind of a placeholder for what Vault will inject. It will inject a name and a password into the string. And so it's just creating a user using standard MySQL, and I'm also granting access to that user. Select access, so that's why I'm calling it read-only. So now that I've done that, and obviously you can modify this however you see fit. This is just one example, so you could change it to be whatever you want. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from Vault. I know you Rust guys are going to be like, read from it? You just created a password. What the heck? I don't know. I don't make the rules here. But you're going to read from it. And when you read from the read-only group, it's going to give you a username and a password that you can use to log into MySQL. So now I could say MySQL-user. And you can paste that in there. And then we'll do the password here. And now I'm logged into MySQL. So you can see that it's pretty easy to get up and running and integrated with Vault and have your dynamic secrets. And you notice on here it has a least duration, so you know that it can expire. And you can set up different policies that you want for that policy. So I just use the defaults, but you can provide additional information for that. All right, so we'll go ahead and exit out of here. And yeah, definitely. I'd actually probably post it to a forum on the public internet and then tweet it out.
There's a reason I asked that, obviously, that question. You didn't talk about the Cubby Hole?
So yeah, we'll talk briefly. Honestly, I didn't have it in the talk, but I can talk about Cubby Hole. So Cubby Hole is going to be different though. Because we're going to tie this together with an actual application shortly, the username password. But Frank's asking about the Cubby Hole backend, which was in the previous slide, but I didn't really expand on because honestly, there's going to be a ton of, you guys probably want to get to the after event rather than hear me yak the whole night. But Cubby Hole is a different backend, and what it is it's basically saying I only want a specific user to be able to access it. So it's basically drop it in there, and only that user can access it. It doesn't matter what anyone else's rights are. And so it can be an easy way to perhaps hand off a password. But what's even better, really, I think, is the username that you're logging in with should be able to access the read-only role, or whatever the role is for creating users within your particular slice of the database. Maybe it's only within a particular scheme, and then allow them to create it, and then they would have it. And then what's even better than that is letting the application do it, which we'll do shortly. Make sense? We'll tie it together in a minute. All right, so we just talked about the MySQL backend, and now we're going to talk about the different auth backends. So this is just different ways of authenticating, and I have app ID crossed out because it's deprecated. So app ID is basically their attempt to solve the chicken and the egg problem. And what do I mean by the chicken and the egg? Well, I have something that I am encrypting, but I need some sort of credential to access that, whether it be to access the REST API or something to decrypt it. And what was app ID? Well, app ID was basically saying, well, what if we had something that was kind of hard to guess and something that was embedded within the application? And so they say, well, you could use like a MAC address for the hard-to-guess thing, and it really didn't sit well with me or others. And so they refined it with app role, and app role actually, it's a little better, but it's not much of an improvement. And so one of the questions that everyone asks is, how do I solve this whole chicken and the egg problem? And for that, we're going to turn to Frank. So that's definitely reducing the scope of the problem. But if whatever you have is already compromised, then basically you can narrow the scope of the problem, but it really becomes very difficult to do unless you have something that does orchestration for you.
But the only way to truly protect the system is to unplug it. If you've got a root system that has someone's compromised root access on a core system, you're beyond screwed anyway.
It is all about reducing your risk. And so what I was going to say is the best way that I know to deal with this, the chicken and the egg problem, is you need something that does your orchestration for you. And why is that? Well, if it's already compromised in your host, well, what if you're spinning up a new instance of that VM every time you deploy the app, or every 10 minutes? What if every time it scaled up a new instance of that VM, it was upgraded to a new version? These are things that you can do, but you need something that's doing this orchestration for you. And it can also reduce your window of time. So instead of, so basically what it does is when you submit the app to this orchestration, we'll call it a pass, because that's what I'm thinking of, but there's plenty, you could do this yourself. You could create your own pass. But you log in with your credentials, and you have certain rights, correct? So then you push your app, and that app says, I want to request certain rights. And when it requests it from the pass solution, the orchestration, and it says, okay, well, is the user that pushed this app, sent this app to me, allowed to do that? Request those permissions? Yes. And at that point, it can manage those. So you need the computers to be aware about all the permissions in order to beat the chicken and the egg problem. Because you need someone to push the app, you need someone to say, this is the app, and then at that point, the computer take over. And you can do that to some degree, but the problem is like, if you're doing it yourself, okay, well, I'll do it for this, I'll do it right now, but then your app crashes. Does someone have to go there and type your username and password to spin it up again? Does someone have to provide that window? Like, if you reduce the window of time, who's there when the app crashes? You need something orchestrating it that actually knows what to do. Frank, did you have a...
And while I agree with you on the orchestration, that's the best one we have.
I don't think it's a chicken and the egg problem. You can still have something get compromised, but the chicken and the egg is...
Compromise the orchestration layer, then I can compromise all the security provided by that orchestration.
I think what you're saying is it can still get compromised. Absolutely. Okay. And anything can... We agree that the only way to protect something is to not have it entirely. It's all about... And you know, that was at the very beginning of the talk, is you want to make it hard enough that people don't find it valuable to actually compromise you. That's why we had to look into why are we trying to protect ourselves. You might have different amount of strength of protection depending upon what you're trying to protect, right? Exactly.
So you may be compromised, but if it's only for 15 minutes or 30 minutes aside, at least you have a rotation mechanism.
Yep.
If you don't have a rotation mechanism, then you're compromised until
Right.
the person comes in and updates the file.
Exactly. And many passes can actually reset themselves. And they create everything in isolation, so maybe a piece of it gets compromised, but it resets. But they could compromise that. You can always compromise something more, but it's how many layers are you going to have time to do, especially if it's resetting itself all the time.
Well, to call back to your earlier point, which was it's a matter of how are you going to respond when something happens?
Right.
Because you're always eventually are going to have something that happens, no matter how you get it.
The comment was, which I agree with since I said it as well, but the comment was saying, you mentioned earlier, it's about how you respond when something is compromised that is important, because you are going to get compromised. And I think that that is a very good thing to bring back into the conversation. And I think we're all agreeing here. So, but I do like all the participation. So, thank you very much for that. Makes me feel like someone's listening.
You said the orchestration thing you were talking about was called pass?
A pass. So the question is, you said the orchestration thing you're talking about is called a pass. Yeah, platform as a service. So it's basically the next layer on top of an IaaS, so infrastructure as a service.
Can you use some examples that you do kind of orchestration?
Well, yeah. So Pivotal provides an open source product called Cloud Foundry. So actually, I need to repeat this because apparently I'm being recorded, but not by security intelligence people, because they don't need my sort of intelligence. No, but the question is, can you provide an example of a pass? And Pivotal works on an open source product called Cloud Foundry, and we have a commercial product called Pivotal Cloud Foundry. But there are other passes out there as well. I mean, you think about it, Yard Engine is one. There's a number of them out there, but I'm very partial to Cloud Foundry for. So Kubernetes still needs something to do the orchestration for you. Okay. Yeah. You still and you still need to tie all those pieces together. So I would view that whole environment as a lot of duct tape and glue at this point, because you have to do a lot of that work yourself. But it does solve a different type of problem in that Cloud Foundry isn't necessarily the most mature for like big data solutions, for example. So it depends on how much flexibility you want. Everything in computer science, it's a science and an art. So it's always going to be a trade-off. Cloud Foundry is very prescriptive, and it's going to be super easy to do what you want to do. But if you hold the phone wrong, then you start to have some issues. Whereas something that you can have ultimate flexibility with, you're going to have a lot more work. I can use binary numbers to do anything, but do you want to write a pass with it? It's really about the trade-offs and what works for your particular situation. Good questions, guys. So let's see. Going back to this, there's a number of different ways to authenticate. We won't dive into any of these in super detail, except for we're going to demo GitHub authentication, and we're also going to demo non-dev mode for the server. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to have to start up the server, and I think I need to, actually I know I need to change. Okay, so we have to do, we're going to start up the server, and this time you'll notice that it kind of halted at the very beginning because we're not in dev mode. So what did I do? I said vault server and then a config file. And I'm not going to go through the config file because it's the most boring example you've ever seen. And you can find it on their website. But we're starting in memory. It's all the boring settings at the moment. But the point is really to talk about how we authenticate to it and how we seal and unseal and what seal and unseal is. So now that we've done that, we'll go ahead and kick this off. And for here, we're going to have to export our address again. And this time, this one, I actually have it configured to a different port. And then I also ran vault init-key threshold. So what is this doing? It's initializing vault. And so who here has seen a movie? This is where I check to see if people are paying attention. People have seen movies? No one is awake. All right, so some people have seen movies. All right. So in lots of movies that are like spy-based, you have someone on one side of the room and someone on the other side of the room, and they have keys, and they're like, okay, go. And then they launch a nuclear missile or something's top secret, right? So you've seen that a lot, that paradigm a lot. This is actually sealing and unsealing is that paradigm taken to the crypto world. So the key threshold is how many keys do you need to launch that nuclear missile, okay? You can set it to whatever you want. I did 2 because I only wanted to do it twice, but the default is 3. And then you can set any number of keys you want for that. The default is 5. I didn't really care about that because it didn't impact how long it took to do the demo, but you can change that to whatever you want. And the idea is that one person gets each key. So right now, at this point, after I do this init, you need to write down these unseal keys and give them to someone and have them manage that. And each one only gets one of the keys. And you might say, well, that's kind of a pain. I don't want to have 10 people managing these keys and have 4 people do it. Well, at that point, you kind of lose a lot of the benefits, but you could set your threshold to 1 and have 1 key. But you know, it's all about trade-offs, right? Do you want to deal with the overhead, or do you want to deal with the security problems? It's really up to your organization. So at this point now you can. I'm sorry, was there a question? It's because I'm the first to connect to it. There's no data in it, so you actually can't compromise anything right now. And once you lock it down with this initial root token, you're the only one that can log into it now anyways as well. So at that point, and actually I probably should have repeated that question. So the question was, why was I allowed to do the unseal, or why was I allowed to init it? It's because I'm the first person to do it, and that's safe because there's no data in it. And I'm the only person getting back that password. If someone else had done it, it would have already been, the initialization sequence would have already been started. And they would have had these keys to lock it down. So we'll do vault, unseal, and then I'm going to type in 1. Now, what did I do wrong there? I have to go over these, some of these things. You probably noticed it and you didn't know you noticed it. Let me do it again and see if you can see what I did wrong. So I have to do it twice. This is just it still functions, but I did something insecure. Well, that too. Yeah, bash history, yeah. So you can do vault. And I have a clipboard manager too, so that's even worse. So you want to hit enter first before you type it. And you probably don't really. Clipboard's actually bad too. That's a good point. But yeah, you definitely want to hide it from your bash. And the other thing to bring up is this unseal. It can happen from multiple computers, right? So one person can unseal it from theirs, and then you can have another one. They don't have to lean over your laptop and do it that way. And that's probably the way it's going to be done in real life. So now that it's unsealed, I can do a vault status. And you can see that I get it's not sealed anymore. And I also need to get that password. If you lose this information, you're screwed. So don't lose it. Yeah. Put it on Twitter where you're not going to lose it. So then you can do vault auth. Then you do vault auth, and now you're authenticated as the root user. So I was able to, this is basically your initial setup for this the system when you're doing it with production. And you're probably going to have different config files and stuff like that. Some of you will need to use LDAP and et cetera and stuff. But we're going to just run through using it with GitHub because it's pretty easy to do and makes an easy demo. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to do a auth enable GitHub. And so this is basically saying I want this backend to be enabled, right? And it's kind of like the mount we did earlier with MySQL. And now I need to tell it that I want to do a write, and I say I want to configure GitHub so that Spring Projects, that's the organization ID for the authentication. So you basically need a GitHub account within the Spring Projects org. You can make it whatever org you want, but I happen to be a member of that already, so it made it easier for my demo. And then the next thing you need to do is you can authenticate. So you select the method, which is GitHub, and then you provide a GitHub access token. I happen to have the GitHub access token stored in an environment variable, and now I'm authenticated using that. Now you'll see it echoes out a token back to the screen, and then that token is now in my file. So it doesn't use GitHub for the whole duration. It just uses that initially, and then assigns you a token and behaves as it does normally. So once you've authenticated, you use a token. That's the only built-in mechanism into Vault, and as it should be. And it uses that token for the rest of the duration of your session. All right, so now we've seen that as well. And at this point, we're going to, while I get this started, does anyone have any questions? Nat? Oh, yes.
Another callback. So earlier you mentioned that it's best to use a token, not an encrypted password. So that was an example of the GitHub token that will take tokens
right.
into your GitHub account so you got them to your profile.
Correct. So the comment was, it's another reference back to earlier, it's best not to use an encrypted password. You want to use a randomly generated token, which that happens to be an OAuth access token. So he was just commenting, this is that practice in real life by a what I would call a respectable company, GitHub. Sure. Those access tokens that they have there?
Yeah, well, when you fire up your vault server, those and that root key that you said QCs don't lose them, put it in like a big deposit box, or where can I store it?
Well, you could. You could. Well, I was suggesting Twitter earlier to store it. Yeah, and you can also get devices like this. Yep. And the YubiKey can basically plug into your USB and you touch it and it'll type it for you. And you keep that in a safe. So physical security is not out of the question at that point.
I do have a question for you, Ron.
Yes.
I'd like to know what your thoughts are on the way that they passed the token as a custom header.
Custom header?
Right, so the X vault token, whatever that attribute is, as opposed to using the standard authentication header that gateways tend to filter out from logging and stuff like that.
So the question is, what are my thoughts on using the X Vault token versus using a standard header? Honestly, I hadn't given it a lot of thought, but most of the time headers aren't really logged unless you modify the setup itself. And it's going to be encrypted. It's not going to be stored in browser history. Typically, headers are supposed to be one of those things that you send credentials through. So I think it's generally fine. in terms of why are they using their own header name versus an existing one, I don't know. That's somewhat debatable. Yeah. I think the main thing is they aren't going to run into a collision this way, most likely. All right, so we're going to take a look at some samples now. And I think this font might be a little hard to see, so we'll change the font size. You know, actually, I didn't try it because I haven't done it in a while. There you go, Control Plus. No, it's actually built in now. Yeah, it's built in now. It's just old habits die hard. So the question is, can you get it to zoom, please? And yes, but I forgot that I could do that. Thank you for. He was just making it easier on me. Can everyone see that, or do I need to do it a little more? I'll do it a couple more just to. So right here I have. Can everyone see that now in the back? All right. So what? I'm sorry. Okay, cool. So right here we basically have some code using Spring Vault. And what is it going to do for us? Well, the main thing is it's going to do our object to JSON mapping. So it'll look very similar to the REST template with Spring, which honestly, and it's using REST template behind the scenes. I'm okay with it using REST template behind the scenes, but I've had so this is done by one of our other engineers, and it's still in milestone phase. And I don't actually like that it's using the REST template style stuff because it's not very easy to use. So we're going to actually refactor these APIs. We talked about it just 2 days ago. And we're going to give this a new spin on things. So this is still a milestone phase, but this is how you do it today. Mostly wanted to tell you that so that if you try it in 6 months, you're not like, what the heck? This is a milestone. It is going to change. But it will still give you this. So like right now with the APIs, you have to provide JSON. And changing it from JSON or from an object to JSON and back and forth is kind of a pain. So you can use Spring's object converters to do that very easily. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying I need to get the argument out of there for the token, and then I create a template, and then I do DB credentials. It's just a POJO. So you can see here it's just a POJO. And then after that, I take those credentials and I write it to Vault using the Vault template. And then the Vault key is up there. And then after that, I read it out, and then I write it out to the console. So you'll see here, it's writing it out after it read it, and then we can also check it out here. Let's see. Vault. Oops, that's the wrong one. I was connected to the wrong one. Still connected to the wrong one. What am I doing wrong? Oh, ha! It's using my token from when I logged in from the other session. So it's not using the dev token that we did earlier. So we have to do... So not only is it the wrong port, it's also the wrong... So, and then I called that one something else. Secret Hello Spring Vault. I thought, oh, that was the right value. I thought it was the wrong value, but it's the right value. Okay, so no problem that time. Okay, so we wrote it and we read it, and then we verified that it was there. Nothing terribly interesting there. We're going to go on to the next example. And this is taking it a little level further, because that's not actually using dependency injection or anything like that. It's just a main method using the template. So what that's illustrating is if you're not using Spring elsewhere, you'll still be able to use this functionality, although it's not going to be quite as awesome because the more you integrate with Spring, the more you want to integrate with Spring because it's going to make the rest of your life easier. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'm glad you asked. Yes. The question is, what do you mean by that? And I'm glad you asked. So here we have Vault config, and this is basically saying I want to get from the environment the URI and then create a Vault endpoint from it. And the endpoint is basically where am I going to find Vault. And then I'm creating a token authentication from that as well. And that's being configured. We'll talk about this a little more in just a minute, but just bear with me at the moment. So we have Vault URI. That's what we were seeing earlier. And then we also have the token 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then after I've done that, I can do something like this. So Vault property source. Everyone familiar with Spring's property sources? It says, given some sort of source, I want to extract out properties. And a lot of times they're property files. But in this instance, it happens to be Vault. And you might recognize this path that it's using, secret/hello Spring Vault. It's the same one we've been using all night. So then in there, we stored a username and a password. So this should output B. Wayne and I am Batman. And in fact, it does. So that is how you integrate with it. And the config that we see here, oops, looks like I opened up another instance of it. But the config that we saw here, we're going to actually create one out of the box, so you don't have to do this boilerplate code that will extract it out of the environment. It's just not done yet because, see that ... That's all the other options that you might want to do, and we haven't gotten there yet. So right now it's just a ticket, but it will be coming soon so that you can just specify those properties and you won't have to specify this config. And of course, when the boot integration comes there, it'll pick it up from your class path and automatically apply things for you as well. Vault property sources, yeah. So the other thing that we're going to do too is you'll notice the username password makes a lot of sense in a particular context, because within the secret/Spring Boot Vault, or Spring Hello Spring Vault. That's what it was. So it makes sense in that context, but you might have a username and password for two different systems, and if it's binding to that when you're using multiple property sources, it's confusing. And even out of context, it's kind of confusing. If it's a database password, it'd be nice if the property was named database password. So we're going to add the ability to add a prefix to it or something like that for the properties as well.
And then, of course, each of those methods sets attributes within it
Right.
based on what you set. So.
Yes. Right.
That is the same token that gives me access to it. So in practice, in production, right, how would you see something like this used? How would that work?
So the question is, how would you use something like this in production? And the answer is, of course, always, it depends. So there's, Frank was talking about how he was very happy with the app ID scenario. And the app role is the new version of it. You can do everything you want with app role that you could with app ID. So essentially, he's also likes app role. And so what that does is it narrows your window of time. It says, okay, and it can set different things on it, like you can only use this password 10 times within this window of time. So, but then at that point, if it crashes and you spin it back up, what do? Right? It becomes a problem unless you have some sort of container orchestrating it. And that's where Cloud Foundry would come in, is what you would do is you'd say, okay, at that point, Cloud Foundry would have integration with Vault, and believe it or not, we're working on that, and it will also work with Boot as well. And what it does is it says, okay, this app is allowed to access these things. It manages the permissions at the time of deployment of the app. And it says, does the developer that deployed it have access? Yes. Then I will associate that to this application. And now it knows that if it restarts it, because it's the one restarting it, that it should get a credential from Vault. Well, that someone assigned you the authority. But yeah, it keeps going. But yeah, that's from the developer's workflow, yes. So Spring Cloud, the comment was, I think there's integration coming with Spring Cloud config. And the answer is yes. That's slightly different, and it's not going to solve the chicken and the egg scenario. You need some sort of, the problem is if no one's there and it crashes, what's going to bring it back up? And I think that's what we're all asking. And the only answer it can be is computers, unless you want a human to have to be involved, and that's not going to work for most people that are asking that sort of question. So in order for that to happen, you need something doing that, and the easiest answer for that is a pass.
Well, but another thing is, so and that was something I was interested in, right? When are we going to see that in Cloud Foundry? Because if Vault's running as a service within Cloud Foundry, and we can just find our app in Vault,
Right.
then we don't need the credential.
I'm thinking of the pipelines that are outside of Vault. Or
Outside of Cloud Foundry?
Yeah, I'm running in I've got Jenkins. What did you say? You know what I said.
So the question is, what about apps running outside of Cloud Foundry? And the answer was, screw that. Sorry, I could resist. No, hold on.
We don't manually say CF push.
Right.
Right? No, we have systems that do that for us. We've got some pipeline or something that's doing that. And that has to have an authority. Something has to authorize that to be able to push into Cloud Foundry. Well, how do you secure that? You have the same issue at some point. Right now, we're using an LDAP, user and password.
Yeah. So the question basically says, how do we automate this in something like Jenkins that wants to automatically push to Cloud Foundry? And the answer always is depends. But the way that, well, hold on, I'm gonna keep going with this. So the answer is always it depends. But at that point, you're going to need a human most likely to be involved. And the way that I've seen this done in other production scenarios is typically most of the builds are actually just going to pre-prod, and when you decide, okay, we're going to push to prod, someone has to enter a password. But the thing is you could do that during normal business hours when someone's actually there to type it. It doesn't matter later on if it crashes, which you're going to run into with basically the other situations. You do have to bootstrap it if you want to secure it. Otherwise, you are going to run into the exact same problem. So I agree. You need a human involved at that point, but it's hopefully it's less frequently and during normal business hours. And most likely you want a human to be there, so a lot of people imagine that these companies that are pushing all the time, they have no fear at all of pushing. Like Netflix, when they push, they still have someone monitoring the system that they're pushing to. The reason why it's happening all the time is because there's 10 different developers pushing 10 different microservices. But after they push it, they actually keep an eye on it. I mean, they have systems monitoring it, but they check to see, are things cool? Do I need to roll back? And they do it during business hours. Those are kind of all the... So a lot of times, you'll look at other things like Spinnaker, that does these sort of things. It also will have a manual. It's optional, obviously, but there's optionally a manual intervention of doing something like typing in a password.
And at least what I see, it's only about pushing it out to a prod-like environment, not necessarily pushing it out automatically all the way to prod.
Yeah.
Because kind of like you said, sometimes you just want to have somebody there monitoring it,
So once the code review goes, then they would basically get an alert, type in the password, and then they go on.
And maybe that is the compromise.
Or the compromise is we don't care and there's a password that's stored. There's always, it's an art and a science. So I don't have an answer to make it totally automated. In most scenarios that I've seen, the people that are pushing to production typically want it to happen somewhat under their control. And so they're going to be there to type the password anyways. And you're still alleviating all those headaches that you're going to have of it crashed, it needs to spin back up, or all the other scenarios you can imagine of I need to scale up sort of thing, scale down. Justin and then Frank.
All right, so you keep saying password, typing that password. I just want to make sure I understand what the workflow would be. So whether using Krebs or doing manually, you would be typing that password out, authenticating with Vault with some kind of backend so that you can get a token that you can then give to the application so the application can use that token to get the credentials that they want.
So the question is, and I'm going to try to paraphrase it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the question is, when you're typing in the password to send the app to the pass or whatever, are you authenticating with Vault or something else? And like in the scenario that I was outlining, I would say something else, but it doesn't have to be. And you might be just authenticating with Cloud Foundry that has automatic bindings to Vault. So in the same way that Vault integrated with MySQL, a pass can spin up a new instance of Vault all by itself because you asked it to and you have permission to. At that point, you have rights to do whatever you want with that resource because you created it. And so any apps that you push could bind to it. So it's actually managing Vault for you. It's managing Vault's credentials for you based upon your credentials that are associated to Cloud Foundry. And however you set up Cloud Foundry to authenticate would be the credentials that you're using. A lot of companies want to use your Active Directory credentials because it's an easy way to manage all the users and associate them to groups and orgs and stuff like that because they've already done it.
Yeah, I guess in my scenario, you were trying to authenticate to an existing Vault because you needed some password to something that's not managed by Vault, that's not supported like Oracle or something like that.
Right.
That way you just get a token that's temporarily useful for when starting up that application.
So if you needed to do that, then you could basically have Cloud Foundry expose it as a service. So you can expose it as an external service available to other parties, basically.
But at some point, you're going to have to put, in that case, you'll have to put Vault in Cloud Foundry because we have to authenticate in Cloud Foundry.
Right.
To begin with, right? So any of that will work. It just depends where you want to put the password, right? Anything you can think about.
Yep. Frank?
So one of the things that concerns me, or we probably will have to you and I had a conversation about this over email, everything that Vault shows as the properties is going to show up in Actuator. Are you guys masking everything by default, or is that something that
So Actuator will already mask things automatically if they're named. What's that?
Let's say password or PW or records or regex is matched, but it's not going to just match any property that I put in there. But if it came out of Vault, I would assume we would want those properties that came out of Vault to be default masked.
That's probably a good point, and the answer is it's in milestone 1, or maybe 2. And so we actually haven't gotten that. We actually haven't even gotten that far yet.
That's just why I was suggesting it, because I know you're involved in it.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a good.
As a developer who deals with security, that if something comes out of my system,
Yeah.
whatever it is, it does not show up in the Actuator endpoints displaying those properties.
So the comment is, so anyone not familiar with Actuator, Actuator is a way to expose lots of stuff to the world via REST API, JMX, et cetera, with Spring Boot. And the comment is, will it mask that out automatically? My response is, depending if right now it's depending if the property starts with a particular prefix like secret. Frank's comment is, well, it'd be nice if it did it regardless if it came from Vault. And I agree, it would be nice. And it's not there yet because we're in milestone 2. But noted. Thanks, Frank.
Should I log that as a ticket, or do you just want to bring it back to your team?
Well, there's not a project for that yet. It doesn't exist. We haven't done the boot integration yet. It's not even a project yet. End of the year is when it'll probably be coming in Spring Boot 5 along with a lot of the other stuff. because that's actually the next minor or major release of boot. Boot did 1.5.1, and it's only patch releases at this point. Yeah, and that's actually, so the comment was if you don't name it something like that, it's going to show up unmasked in Cloud Foundry. And that actually is a point that I was thinking about making but forgot. So thank you for bringing it up. There's other, I actually stole it from his mind and thought I came up with it. But there's other systems that use this same convention which may end up biting you. That's a very good example. I didn't have one off the top of my head. I was thinking like Jenkins. So Jenkins, if it were using those values, it wouldn't mask them if you aren't using something that's following those conventions either.
Right, unless you put them in your credential store. But yeah, and that's when he's talking about it, that's all in that same pile of how do we mask all this stuff. And
But
we've done all this due diligence to put it into a system and tie into that system.
yeah.
And oh, hey, all these useful tools now just display in plain text for the world.
I think in general, there's only so much within your world of control. And so in general, I think it's a good practice to prefix it with one of those prefixes because you never know when you're going to run into a tool that does not mask it. Is basic because it might not know where that environment variable came from.
The other argument is you can customize that index and put your own key in the pattern. Right. It's rebooting it, not
So the other comment was you can customize the regex that masks the environment variables to match your stuff for boot, but not Cloud Foundry. That's another good point. Yeah, BK. They are secured. It does, depending upon how much you trust the user that has access to it.
Let's be honest with him. They're secure as of yesterday by default. Prior to yesterday, they were not secure by default.
If you had Spring Security on your class path, you were.
By default.
Right.
If you only had actuator, they were now on by default yesterday.
Correct.
Until yesterday.
Correct.
That being said, you still don't want a developer who has actuator access to be able to see credentials from a production system.
It does. Yeah. So the comment is you don't want to have a developer have access to it, and I agree. You want to mitigate the risk as much as you can. Adding authentication, as BK mentioned, and authorization to the endpoints helps in one layer. Masking helps in another layer. It's definitely good to have defense in depth. Both very good comments. Any other questions? All right, now we're going to... Oh, BK, yeah.
Would you see maybe through the Jenkins credential plugin being able to plug Vault into there as a means of feeding the authentication from, say, another system?
That's actually a good idea. I hadn't considered that myself. So the comment is... So the comment is maybe you could integrate Jenkins credentials container with Vault to basically take care of that. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can put the credentials in Jenkins today, and I think it's for something, I don't know. Yeah. And it's that red software. Yeah. The key probably next to it, so you probably but it gives you some peace of mind. But if you plug Vault in as a plugin.
Yeah. No, that's yeah. If there was a custom plugin for Vault and Jenkins, that might help alleviate that. That's a good point.
You start that GitHub project and send it to me, and I'll jump in on it.
Well, if it makes you feel better, Jenkins is on a CG security, so Hudson's up to date. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. All right. So, anyways, for those that don't know, a CG security is very, very old 1.0 Spring Security, which is no longer maintained. All right. So, I have one more demo here for you guys. So this. Did I have another question? Nope. Okay. Just banter while I'm taking my time, which is fine. All right. So we have I have yet another app, and this one is going to be very similar to what we saw. The vault config is the exact same thing we saw earlier. And now I have, minus one thing, and we'll get to that. I have a JDBC template that's being injected into here, and I'm going to do a query from a database. And then the vault config is pretty much the exact same thing, except for now the path is to MySQL creds read-only, which should look familiar. It's how we were creating our dynamic database credentials. So then how am I consuming them? Well, in my Spring Boot properties, I have the vault URI and token just like we did beforehand, but now I'm mapping the spring.datasource.username and spring.datasource.password to those properties that are defined in Vault. And I probably should have asked this earlier. Who here has used Spring Boot? Okay, great show, good show of hands. Okay, so probably don't need to go into too much detail. So that's basically all I had to do. There's some caveats to this that we'll talk about in just a minute. So I'll start this app up. So it's querying the messages directory, which is just Hi Kansas City. So it hooked in with that dynamic username password. So what are the problems that we have with this? Well, there's a time to live on this credential. Is there anything keeping it alive? Not at this time. Spring Cloud Config actually does that. Sorry, not Spring Cloud Config. Spring Vault Cloud Config does that. And this is another thing that is going to be reswizzled so that you don't need Spring Cloud in order to do this, because it's not really a cloud thing that you don't really need that dependency in order to perform that. But what will be cool that Cloud can do is it has like a refresh scope, and it will be able to refresh your beans automatically for you. So that's something that would be very valuable for it. So it might actually perform a rotation on the passwords, request a new one, versus just renewing the existing credentials without restarting your app. So those are some of the things that we might go to eventually with the cloud side of things. And that is a wrap for my presentation. Any further questions?
What version is Spring Vault right now?
So Spring Vault is at 1.0 milestone 2. So it's just in milestone phase right now. Any other questions? All right, well, it looks like we are wrapped up here. I, once again, would like to thank you guys for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any feedback about tonight at all, whether it be the talk or if it be about logistics, anything you have, I'd like to hear about it. We always like to try to improve on ourselves. And if not, if you have nothing else, or if you just want to tell me in person, just come on down. But otherwise, I hope to see you guys over at Austin's Bar and Grill. And see you next month. Thanks again, guys.